Picture this, late 1990s Miami. The radio is on in every car, every corner store, every beauty shop, every block party. And Trina's voice is everywhere, not a novelty record, not a crossover experiment. Her voice is part of the city's daily rhythm. Miami rap isn't trying to sound like New York or Los Angeles. It already knows what it is. It's bass-heavy, raunchy, street-coded, unapologetically black, and deeply local. Trina's rise is not happening in isolation. It's happening alongside Trick Daddy, alongside a generation of artists rooted in Liberty City, Carol City, Overtown. Places tourists were warned about, but which were producing the city's most recognizable sound. This is important to mention because Miami's music scene didn't just entertain the city. It documented who was still here. By the late 1990s, Black Miami was still visible, still audible, still central to the city's identity. Black American neighborhoods were not shrinking yet. In fact, through the 1980s and into the early 1990s, Miami's non-Hispanic Black population was growing, peaking at roughly 1/4 of the city's residents by 1990. That growth reflected decades of migration from the Jim Crow South, Bahamian settlement patterns dating back to the early 20th century, and post-war Black working-class expansion tied to port work, service labor, construction, and municipal employment. But here is where the story turns. As Miami rap became profitable, the city itself was being remade around a very different image. Miami's political and economic power structure had already shifted earlier, beginning in the 1960s, when large-scale Cuban migration reshaped local governance, business ownership, and language dominance. Over time, Miami became one of the few major U.S. cities where Spanish functioned not as a secondary language, but as a gatekeeping mechanism. By the 1990s and early 2000s, Spanish fluency increasingly appeared as an unofficial requirement in many sectors, even when jobs did not formally demand it. For Black Americans whose families had been in Miami for generations, this created a quiet but persistent barrier. Hiring networks shifted. Advancement narrowed. Entire industries began favoring bilingual or Spanish-dominant labor pipelines, while Black American workers, who had built the city's infrastructure long before it was global, were increasingly locked out of upward mobility. This is where harassment enters the picture, not always in the form of overt racial violence, but through economic pressure, exclusion, and erasure. Black residents reported being passed over for jobs, treated as outsiders in neighborhoods they had anchored, and policed more heavily even as new migrant populations were framed as essential to Miami's international image. At the same time, Miami's club culture was changing. The clubs that once centered Black Miami bass and Southern hip-hop aesthetics began to shift toward a curated Latin global look. The sound remained Black at its core, but the presentation changed. Accents were softened. Faces were rebranded. And gradually, people who did not come from the original Black American neighborhoods began to be positioned as the public face of a genre that had been built locally by Black Miami artists. This is where the resentment around credit comes from. As the 2000s approached, DJ Khaled and Ace Hood emerged as dominant figures associated with Miami's rap identity. Both are often presented as emblematic of Miami hip-hop in national narratives. Yet the sonic blueprint they operated within was already established by Black American Miami artists years earlier. The chants, the bass patterns, the street language, the club energy, these were not new inventions. They were inherited. And for many longtime Black Miami residents, it felt like watching a house built by their community get new owners while they were still standing on the lawn. That is the setup. Now here's the investigation. Because when people ask, where did all the Black people go in Miami? It is not just nostalgia, and it is not just times changed. It is numbers, it is policy, it is economics, and it is a city that remade itself so aggressively that it started treating Black roots like they were in the way. Start with the demographic reality that shapes everything. Miami-Dade is a majority Hispanic Latino county, and it has been moving deeper into that identity for decades. State demographic reporting puts Miami-Dade at roughly 65% Hispanic or Latino and about 14% non-Hispanic Black, with additional residents identifying as Hispanic Black, multiracial, and other categories. The same reporting shows what visitors feel immediately. Spanish is not a second language in Miami-Dade, it is an operating system, with about 3/4 of residents speaking a language other than English at home, and Spanish leading by far. This needs to be said because Miami's Black population is not one single story. It is Black American, it is Bahamian and Caribbean rooted, it is Haitian, it is Jamaican, it is Afro-Latino, and it sits inside a political and cultural landscape where race and ethnicity do not function the way they do in places like Atlanta or Detroit. A major Miami wealth and disparity summary notes that Miami's racial landscape is shaped by an ethnic hierarchy dating back to early Cuban exile power and the racialization that followed, with race operating differently inside Hispanic Latino identity, and with real economic consequences across groups. This is where the new Miami aesthetic comes in. Miami sells itself as global, bilingual, sexy, high-end, glossy. The clubs, the condos, the waterfront, and yes, the music. But underneath the marketing, there is a shadow story. Colorism and proximity politics inside a city where Latin is often treated like a brand and Black is treated like a complication. That same Miami wealth and disparity work emphasizes that race and skin tone still shape life chances, even within Latino communities, and that the city's identity categories can blur who gets recognized, protected, or resourced. Now zoom into the physical geography. If someone wants the beginning of Black displacement in Miami, they cannot skip Overtown. Overtown was once called a thriving Black cultural and business district, a place where Black Miami had institutions, nightlife, commerce, and a sense of permanence. Then the federal highway era arrived like a wrecking ball. Reporting and historical documentation have long tied the construction of I-95 and I-395 to the gutting of Overtown's prosperity, breaking up families, wiping out property, and damaging generational wealth through forced relocation and undercompensation. A detailed account of Overtown's destruction notes that when I-95 opened in 1968, about 8,500 households were displaced, and that the wider urban renewal highway footprint dismantled Black communities across the area. That is not ancient history, that is the blueprint. Because once a city learns it can bulldoze Black communities for progress, it rarely stops at one era. It just changes the language. In the 1960s, it was interstates and urban renewal. In the modern era, it is revitalization, redevelopment, market rate, mixed use, and luxury. And Miami's housing pressure is not an opinion, it is documented. A U.S. HUD housing market analysis for the Miami area describes a region where rental affordability has been extremely expensive, with median gross rent rising sharply, 29% from 2010 to 2017, while incomes grew slowly. And it also notes that the Miami Metro is the only U.S. metro where more than half the population is foreign-born, a reflection of global demand that drives competition for housing and reshapes neighborhoods fast. So where does that leave Black Miami families who are already hit by historic displacement, segregation patterns, and uneven access to ownership? It leaves them standing in front of a city that is pricing them like outsiders. And then comes the employment and opportunity layer, the part locals whisper but rarely see treated like a headline. A Miami-Dade Economic Advocacy Trust Disparity Study update captures community feedback that reads like a warning flare. It describes a brain drain among young Black adults tied to lack of job opportunities and even a preference for Spanish-speaking candidates, reinforcing a cycle where Black residents feel pushed out of the county's economic boom rather than lifted by it. The same study's community feedback also reflects a deep fear of displacement, using language that sounds dramatic until someone realizes it is how people talk when they feel erased in real time. Now add migration churn. Miami has always been a city of movement, but the scale matters. Recent local reporting based on U.S. Census estimates described large domestic outmigration from Miami-Dade at the same time that international migration has been strongly positive, meaning the county is simultaneously losing many residents to the rest of the U.S. while gaining newcomers from abroad. That is not automatically good or bad. but it does explain the emotional reality many Black American families describe. Neighborhoods can change so quickly that the people who built the original community no longer recognize it, and the new economy doesn't automatically make room for them. This is where the music conversation returns, because music is the most honest witness Miami has. When Trina was ringing through late 90s radios, Miami's Black identity was still visible in the city's mainstream cultural bloodstream. But as the decades roll forward, Miami hip-hop becomes something that outsiders consume as a lifestyle, not a lineage. People emulate the accents, the rhythms, the bass-heavy bounce, the club formulas. And the industry often rewards whoever can package it for national consumption, even when the original sound came from Black neighborhoods that were simultaneously being destabilized. That is why the conversation about people taking credit keeps resurfacing. It is not just about individual artists, it is about a recurring pattern. Black communities create the raw material, and then gatekeepers, radio, labels, promoters, nightlife power brokers, decide who gets positioned as the face. Miami is not unique in that. It is just louder about it, because the city sells the vibe so aggressively. So what is the answer to the question? Where did all the Black people go in Miami? Some were displaced decades ago when highways and redevelopment tore through Black districts and confiscated land-based wealth. Some were priced out later as rents climbed and luxury development spread. In a metro where housing affordability has been documented as a long-running crisis and global demand intensifies competition. People left because opportunity did not match the marketing, because job pipelines were not built for them, because economic booms did not translate into Black economic security, and because even local disparity study community feedback points to barriers like Spanish preference hiring dynamics and the resulting brain drain. And some did not disappear at all. Miami still has Black people. But the category is complicated. Afro-Caribbean, Afro-Latino, Black Hispanic, Black American, each navigating a city where race, language, and status collide in ways that can disguise how Black American presence has thinned in certain neighborhoods and institutions over time. Miami's rebrand did not happen by accident. It happened through policy choices, economic incentives, global demand, and a cultural machine that can celebrate Black creativity while shrinking Black permanence. And that is the disturbing part, because a city that makes billions selling Miami culture should not be allowed to treat the Black communities that built so much of that culture like they were just a phase. Scope News tells the truth. Here are the facts. Trina and Trick Daddy came out of real Miami neighborhoods, not beachfront condos. Red Bull Music Academy documented how places like Liberty City shaped Miami's sound through spaces like the Pac Jam. Census data shows the non-Hispanic Black population in Miami peaked around 1990, then declined every decade after, even while the city grew. Overtown's destruction was no accident. WLRN confirmed over 8,000 families were displaced when I-95 was built straight through it. HUD's housing report says rent rose nearly 30% in under a decade, and Miami became the only U.S. metro where most people are foreign-born. Miami-Dade's own study confirmed what Black locals were saying for years: fewer jobs, more discrimination, and a growing fear of being erased. Legal disclaimer. This content is presented for educational, informational, and entertainment purposes only. Viewer discretion is advised. Scope News discusses public records, demographic reporting, historical documentation, and published research while also providing commentary and analysis. This episode includes topics involving race, ethnicity, immigration, displacement, housing, employment barriers, and political and cultural power. Scope News is not providing legal, financial, or real estate advice. Any references to communities, industries, artists, or public figures are included for cultural discussion and context. Interpretations about recognition, influence, and cultural credit are commentary, not statements of criminal conduct. Viewers are encouraged to consult original data sources, official public documents, and multiple reputable reports for additional context.